Welcome back to the series of videos in which I tear a Penguin Villiers engine apart. In this video, the plan is to have the carburetor completely disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled with a new float and gasket set. But before we start, I just like to show you what you might encounter, hopefully you don't encounter, as you take the carburetor apart. This is the float bowl that is on the subject carburetor. It's hard to see, but it's in excellent condition. It almost looks new. But get some light here. I'm sure we're going to need it on the subject. Here is a not so fortunate carburetor float bowl. I'm not sure exactly which engine that I crossed paths with that this float bowl came off of, but as you can see, it corroded to the point where it's transparent. Inside is badly rusted, and even without the hole in it, it would be questionable as to whether that could be returned to service. Anyway, hopefully you don't encounter that. Also, here's an example of one of the hollow brass floats that someone has repaired. Now, brass is metal that can be soldered, and that's actually how these are assembled when they're made, is they're soldered together. But someone has added solder here around the tube that the pilot jet goes through and around here. Now, that may be all well and good that now the float is sealed and it will float. Unfortunately though, adding all that, the weight of the solder to it, will cause it to float at a different level in the fuel, which means there will be more fuel in the float bowl than the carburetor was originally designed for. So that's, I would have to say, a valiant effort to save the float bowl, to save the float and get the carburetor working again, but I don't believe that this would have worked very successfully. And here we have the carburetor body. It's the original Penguin carburetor body. It says S25-3 on it, and it looks to be not bad. Like if this was on the engine, you'd look and say, well, it's maybe a little dirty, but that is severely corroded on the bottom, to the point where I think, no, we can't, it isn't actually corroded through, but that is very corroded, and it would be difficult to clean that up to the point where it could be used. This has been pretty much stripped of any usable parts. The center tube, the guide screw, pilot jet, all that stuff has been pulled off of it to be used on the carburetor that the carburetor body that replaced this one. Anyway, hopefully you don't see something like that when you're tearing your carburetor apart. Anyway, so what we're going to do is just remove our carburetor float here. Now, we had this apart for inspection previously, so now we'll just take the float off. We're going to remove the main jet using a flat screwdriver. The jet just unscrews. It's brass, so please use a screwdriver that's a good fit in the slot in the jet. So there's the main jet removed. Now, when we remove the float will have to be replaced. It's partially collapsed. This side of the float should look a lot like this side of the float. and it doesn't, so we'll replace that. And here we have our inlet needle, which we'll want to remove so it doesn't get lost. And while we're here, this is something we didn't actually inspect before. Something we want to check is the point of the needle. This is a needle valve. This controls the fuel coming into the float bowl. We want to see the point of this. Actually, it doesn't need to be a sharp point, but where the conical tip needs to be in good condition. It needs to not have a groove in it where it's worn. So this one looks to be in good shape. We'll find out when we put it back together if it's going to leak fuel on it. It shouldn't. It looks like it's okay. And one thing we'll check, which I can't do without a light, is the inlet needle goes in the seat here. That seat should be in good shape. It should be clean with no corrosion or pitting to help the needle seal in it. And one other thing we're going to remove over here is our pilot jet. It's just got a slot in it for a screwdriver, so we'll just carefully unscrew that. It shouldn't be too tight, so we'll just unscrew that. There's a small hole in it there we want to clean out. Actually, the same with the main jet. There's the main jet. There's a hole in there which isn't clean at the moment. We can't see through it, so that we'll want to clean out. And we'll want to clean the main tube here. This one's got a little bit of corrosion on it from fuel, or a little bit of gunk on it from old fuel. But we'll clean that off, and we'll take, while we're here, we'll just take this gasket off. There's a gasket for the float bowl. We'll just carefully pull that off. There's no adhesive used on that, so we'll pull that off, and we'll give this surface a light touch with a soft bristled brush, a copper wire brush, just to clean any corrosion off that. And we'll also use our soft bristled brush inside here, and we'll take this pilot jet out, the pilot screw, pardon me. But before we pull it out, what we're going to do is turn it in to see where it's set, so that when we put it back in, we can set it in the same position. So I'll turn it in. There's a half turn, and it stops. So to simply return it to its position, that position, we'll just turn it in when we replace it slowly. So there, it stopped again, so we'll just turn it half turn out. So that's where it was set before. So we know it was set at a half turn. We'll just remove the screw and spring and set them aside so that we can clean this. This is, see the dirt coming off of that? That's dirty. So we want to make sure the passage in there is clean. That goes through to this passage here where the pilot jet was screwed in. And we can't see it, but there's a small hole. Let me get my light again, see if I can show it. So in our carburetor, show it right, it's hard to see, right near my finger there. And there's a small hole right there, just at the edge of the shadow. We'll want to make sure that hole is clear, and of course that spot of light we can see, we want to make sure that's clear. And we want to make sure this is all clean. Actually, there's a passage, this spot in the casting here goes to is for a passage inside the carburetor. If we can see it there, this is the side. Not very well. Anyway, there's a passage there that's actually blocked off here. but that may join. It looks like the passage here might join up to, sorry, the passage here, if this is drilled, and it looks like it was, although it's capped at this end, it may be drilled through. Yeah, it's hard to see. I mean, this drilling, when it was drilled for this, it may have been drilled right through to this passage here. Anyway, we want to go through all of these passages, spray carburetor cleaner in them, blow air through them, make sure there's no dirt in them, so that when this carburetor goes back together, it can work as designed. Okay, so that's the carburetor apart. I'm not going to take you through the process of actually cleaning it. I'm just going to use some carburetor cleaner, possibly some WD-40 and some compressed air, a combination of nylon brushes like a toothbrush and a copper bristled brush, maybe a stainless steel bristled brush. Anyway, we're going to. Okay, so we are now back. I've done some cleaning. Some extra stuff here. So what I've done, briefly, is I've used a variety of chemicals and tools here to clean stuff, and I also took a moment to put a little bit of paint on our intake manifold. What the heck, while I was waiting for other stuff to dry. So what I did was took the small parts, especially the brass parts, and soaked them in this product. It's a Johnson Evinrude engine tuner. It does a good job of taking gum and varnish off of brass parts. I don't know if you can see that. These parts now look like new. And after soaking in the engine tuner, I gave them a blast of compressed air. Then I cleaned them, gave them a blast of brake cleaner. This is probably also sold as tool and parts cleaner. It's alcohol based. It dries with no residue. So I blew off all of the parts that were soaked in the engine tuner, which included I actually sprayed the brass tube inside here and inside the passages to help clean them up. So they were soaked in engine tuner, cleaned with, given a blast of brake cleaner, and then I took, where I wasn't sure about how clear passages were, I took some WD-40 because it's got a straw on it here, and blew in places like where the pilot screw went. So when I blew the WD-40 in where the pilot screw goes, it did come out where the pilot jet goes, and it also came out the hole inside here, which you may or may not be able to see, between this main tube and, yes, between the main tube and where the pilot jet goes, there's a hole inside the carburetor body, which is, of course, difficult to see. But anyway, there's a small hole in there. So when I blew the WD-40 in here, in the side hole where the pilot screw went, it came out the hole where the pilot jet went, and it also came out the hole inside where the opening is inside the carburetor. Now, to check this passage in here, which again you can't see, but it corresponds with this bump on the casting, this tube and the bump. So what I did was simply reached in and tried to cover the hole inside and the hole outside with my finger and squirted WD-40 in there, and I saw it come out the passage inside. So then I blew it out with compressed air, gave it another blast of brake clean. So that looked fine. The passage is clear, and we can also see, perhaps, okay, first we can see that the main jet here is clear, the main tube, pardon me, is clear. You can see light through there, and maybe you can see, if we look down through where the pilot jet goes, we can actually see light through there. And if we look in here, we might be able to see just barely see it past the side here. You might be able to see there's light through there, so that passage is clear. Now there's a passage, there's three passages here. There's the main tube, the hole that is connected directly or indirectly, I guess, to the pilot jet, plus the one right above the pilot jet. So those are all clear. The main tube is clear. This is all clean. I blew back through the seat for the inlet needle. Made sure there was nothing left in here. And our pilot jet got cleaning with a wire brush. Our banjo fitting actually got the wire brush I have actually fit part way in there, so I can give it a little bit of scrub, and I made sure there was no gum in there from old fuel residue. Blew it out with alcohol, or the brake clean. The banjo gauze, they call it, the filter, the fuel filter, was cleaned in the engine tuner, given a blast of compressed air, then the brake clean. The main jet was soaked in the engine tuner, given a shot of compressed air and the brake clean, and we might be able to see that we can see through it. And the pilot jet has a very small hole in it, but if I can turn it just the right way, we should be able to see through it. Anyway, I can see through it. I hold it up and don't look directly at the sun. Just look with a white background, I can see through it. Sorry, the banjo bolt actually appeared to be pretty clean. It was pretty clean, except I noticed even after I gave the threads a quick touch with the brass wire brush, cleaned up the gasket surface here, blew it out, there was a little bit of gum still in it. Pardon me. So I carefully took a small jeweler's screwdriver and just carefully rubbed it in there. It didn't scrape, and it came out. So I gave it another blast of the brake clean, and it came out clear. So besides the jeweler's screwdriver, I used a single edge razor blade in a holder. Used that to carefully make sure the gasket surface here was clean. I also used the tip of my slot screwdriver to clean the end of the top of the main tube, and a fairly well worn brass bristled brush. So now I'm ready to put this back together. So I should be done cleaning. Shouldn't need the small screwdriver, the brush, and the blade, but anyway, what we'll do is, first thing, we'll put the pilot needle in, the pilot screw. So we'll just make sure the spring is on there. Start it in by hand. Carefully screw it in until it stops. And I believe we said a half turn out. So there it's bottomed, so half turn out. Next, we will install the pilot jet. Pilot jet goes in the small threaded hole there. Just screw it in. Take our slot screwdriver and just snug that. It's a brass tube, which is fairly delicate. It doesn't need to be tight. It's not holding the wheels on or anything. So that's in there snug. So now I'm going to put our inlet needle in. and it appears to be okay, so we'll find out. So our inlet needle just drops in place, then our new float goes with the Villiers name up and the metal plate against the needle, inlet needle. Then we'll take the main jet, small little main jet here, and screw that in carefully. Screw in my hand. Actually, I'm going to switch to a larger screwdriver blade here that fits this jet better. So I want to tighten it. I don't want it to slip. So the screwdriver blade fits that really well. So we'll just turn that in until it's snug. Now, just the majority of the carburetor back together. So then we'll take our new gasket set here. So we're going to need the bowl gasket. It sits on there just like it was made for there. I'll put the float bowl on. It doesn't go on in any particular way. And then, now, there are 4 gaskets left here. There's the gasket for the top ring, which we're not using, and then 3 other gaskets. 2 are for the banjo bolt. I'm going to assume that the 2 red ones are for the banjo bolt. I'll set them aside because we're not there yet. And the one that's in this kit that's a different color, I believe, is for the... Oh, look at that, I'm wrong. It doesn't fit the bowl nut. That one doesn't fit the bowl nut. That one fits the bowl nut, so we'll use the one that fits. So we'll put the fiber washer that I just dropped on the ground here. There. Put the fiber washer on there. Put the bowl nut on. Take our 5/16 British Standard wrench and snug that up. Then we'll take our banjo bolt. Now these 2 washers have slightly different inside diameters. We'll see, because one of them goes against the head of the banjo bolt and one of them goes where it's threaded. It's slightly different diameter, so we'll take the one that fits the head of the banjo bolt better. That one's too small, so that makes it easy. So the darker one fits there. Put the filter screen on. Put the banjo bolt on. Now the banjo bolt has a wider surface and a narrower surface. I am going to put the wider surface against the banjo bolt. Then put the other washer on. Then screw the banjo bolt with banjo fitting into the carburetor. Now I'm going to put this in loosely because until the carburetor is installed, we don't know exactly what angle the banjo fitting should be at. So I'm just going to install that loosely. Our clamp is still loose, but I'm going to take the inlet manifold or intake manifold, which has been painted, and try not to mess up my paint job. Just install it loosely. When this is bolted to the engine, we can position the carburetor so it's vertical this way and tighten this clamp. But anyway, there is a reassembled Villiers S25-3 carburetor taken from an engine used in a Penguin amphibious ATV. It's been cleaned. We put some new gaskets and a new float in it. It should work fine, but when we have the engine all back together, and on a stand. We'll first test it and make sure the inlet needle doesn't leak. And if that holds, then we will start the engine and see what happens. Anyway, that's the carburetor back together. I'm actually just going to slip the float pole back off here and give the inside a spray with WD-40, because I'm not sure exactly how long it's going to take me to have the engine ready to go back together completely and have fuel in this. So right now it's got absolutely no oil in it, so it might be subject to corrosion if it gets damp. So I'm just going to spray some WD-40 in it to preserve it. Anyway, next we should be putting the transmission back together.